Hello, my name is Ben Friedman here from the Beniverse, and today I am talking the newest release film from Sony Pictures called Father Stu, which stars Mark Wahlberg, Mel Gibson, and is directed and written by Rosalind Ross, who also happens to be the 31-year-old girlfriend of Mel Gibson. Yikes. Welcome to my review.
It's the place you told me you believed in me. And I thought it makes sense being back here to do this.
Your son is about to make a huge mistake.
I'm gonna be a priest.
For Halloween.
Alright, so Father Stu is the latest released Sony Pictures film that is a faith-based drama about a man named Stu who is a guy who has been kind of troubled his whole life. He comes from this checkered past with a rocky family relationship, to say the least. And he moves to LA to become a movie star and ends up finding God and church and decides to devote his life to the priesthood. This film stars Mark Wahlberg as Father Stu in this film, and right off the bat, there's a lot that can already just be said on this premise, on this film, and I am going to tread lightly here because I don't want to insult or by any means offend the actual faith-centric part of this film. I'm not here to critique or criticize or break down Catholicism in any way. I'm simply here to poke holes at the movie and make fun of it, and boy, am I going to make fun of this movie. This movie, Father Stu, is arguably one of the funniest movies I've seen this year, and it's completely unintentional, and it's directly related to the performance Mark Wahlberg gives into this film. And now I cannot take it away from him. He commits 100% to this role. That's not always for the better of it. There is no subtlety in this character. He is doing the Wahlberg-isms that we are used to at this point. The tough guy, fast act, loose cannon kind of thing that he's done in basically all of his films in his career. That's not an insult on Mark Wahlberg's filmography. I quite like Mark Wahlberg as an actor. He is just feels like he is out of his range for a large portion of this film. This is a guy, and this role feels like a guy who is trying to make something very special and unique and kind of just prove himself as an actor. And honestly, it falls on its face. Kind of think of that idea from Tropic Thunder where Ben Stiller plays that one character, Simple Jack, and he kind of gets ridiculed by his peers due to the nature of which he portrays it, and it's kind of seen as maybe tone deaf. Father Stu has some of those vibes in this film. Now, I wouldn't say necessarily tone deaf, but there are scenes in it where you're just watching Mark Wahlberg commit to something maybe a bit too much, or put on a fat suit, or just play a guy who's at times crippled in his life, and that's a struggle to watch where you're just like, I get that he's acting, I get what he's trying to do, maybe he's not the guy to tackle this movie. And that's kind of the best way I would describe a lot of this movie. It's just full of people who maybe shouldn't be the ones tackling this. Rosalind Ross, who again, as I mentioned, is the 31-year-old girlfriend of Mel Gibson, and I don't want to simply reduce her down to that. I'm sure she is a talented actress, director, writer that's not really seen in this film, I will admit. It's not that her direction is bad in this film. It's just that it feels like it's ripping off things we have already seen before. There's a boxing scene that feels straight out of Rocky, but worse. There are scenes in it, the movie, as it's going through kind of the Stu's checkered past, where I'm watching and I'm like, isn't that just directly a scene from The Wrestler? Or isn't that directly a scene from Mark Wahlberg's other film, The Fighter? And you just can watch that over and over again, and I'm just left thinking, I'm like, what was their thought here? Like, what was she thinking to literally take these scenes that we've seen in other films like this and do it in this film, because there's scenes in there where I'm just like watching it, I'm like, I've seen this scene done 100 times, and not like, oh, art repeats itself. It's like, no, that's like directly like a scene breakdown, even how it's shot, to The Wrestler by Darren Aronofsky. And I'm just like, I was left amazed. I mean, it's just, uh, plagiarism is the greatest form of flattery, so I guess in that case, she gets some credit there. But I was so uninspired by the direction of this film, where I just watched it and I'm just like, yeah, she's kind of just putting the film in a template. Same with the story. Beat from beat to beat where it's going to go. From Act 1, I could have told you exactly where Act 3 goes and how it ends. There is no shock that happens in this film. Convention is not necessarily inherently a bad thing. What this film struggles to do, though, is make an interesting story around it, or really buy the character's change of heart and motivations. Everything happens a bit too quick. And it's the issue when you're trying to cover a guy's whole life, that you don't really get to dive into any of it. It all feels very surface level, and it has to go quick so we can get the beat of him, as a wrestler, then falling, going to Hollywood, then meeting a girl, stalking her, and that's literally what he does in this film. He stalks her to the Catholic Church, then becoming a devout Catholic, becoming a priest. With all that said, you're just like watching and you're just like, okay, I get it, but what's the point through a lot of this film? Because when you're just hitting something just so quick, it's just like, okay, I get that you're trying to tell this guy's life story, but I feel like I've learned nothing about him except the basic outline of it. There's no substance or meat to it. As a guy who was a historian in college, that was always something I struggled with. History is not just simply learning a timeline of events. It's learning a specific thing and learning and extracting what that means on a greater scale. This, it doesn't get there. I don't learn anything about this character that's particularly shocking. I don't learn anything about his psychoses, how it changed. I don't really learn anything about how his parental relationship changes, but I'm supposed to assume that it does. And I never quite buy into that. There's a disconnect between me and the screen. Now, I know I'm crapping on this film. That is not to say that this film is devoid of anything good. And I hate throwing praise at him, but Mel Gibson is a really charismatic actor, and he makes the most with a small role in this film. He is able to showcase grief, regret, pain, exhaustion, kind of all these emotions, to be this broken down individual in a way that is never forced but feels very natural. His performance just comes off as a real guy struggling through life. And then there's the scene at the end where he finally is able to get something off of his chest. And you just kind of see him going through the stages of emotion and grief through that. And watching that, dude, I couldn't stop thinking. I'm like, there's a reason this guy was one of the biggest actors in the world and still is, to many, just a beloved actor. And again, I'm not one who particularly wants to praise Mel Gibson, but disconnecting the art from the artist, which is what I'm trying to do with this film, in a bubble, his performance is really good, and it's kind of the central heart of this film, and it's the part that allows Mark Wahlberg's relationship to be a little bit more focused in on itself. That's kind of the best praise I can give to this film, because the negatives really do just outweigh this film. Let me explain my theater experience real quick, because I think that's also a really important thing. Saw this on a Tuesday night, day before it opened. I went assuming it would be a pretty empty screening because I didn't know anyone who cared about this movie. What ended up happening was I went to basically a Catholic church. It looked like their Bible study decided to go out in masses and see this movie. So there was basically 2 empty seats in the whole theater. And let me tell you, this group that I saw it with treated this film like it was their Avengers Endgame. When certain things happen in this film, they were cheering and celebrating like it was Captain America picking up Mjolnir. It was kind of just an awe-shocking experience to see people get so excited. There's a scene where Mark Wahlberg admits something about himself, uh, basically confessing his sin, and they were up in arms, like just cheering, like, yeah, like, I was just like, is this parody? Is this real life? What is going on? It made the theater experience bizarre. They are buying into every joke, and this film has a, let's just say, conservative nature to it. One, I mean, you could point out the fact that, like, this guy goes west to Hollywood and he loses himself and he becomes, just this terrible guy, just like, and then he finds God who saves him in Hollywood. It's just like, okay, maybe that's something. Maybe is that trying to directly state something about Hollywood culture, knowing again what we know about Mel Gibson and to a lesser degree Mark Wahlberg. You can infer that, and I'm going to infer that that might have been quote unquote subtle in the film. But then there's other stuff in it where it's just like there's lines where it feels, again, for lack of a better word, non-PC. And me not being someone who I would particularly consider myself PC, again, quote unquote, there are scenes with it where they just use certain language that didn't feel necessary to the overall story, but it felt like they were doing it to kind of have this throwback, and they're used for laughs. There's a few words that are used in there, and they're like, okay, that's supposed to be the joke. And let me tell you, this audience was buying into it. They thought this film was funny. I was like, this film is funny to me, but it's completely unintentional. For these people, they are hanging on every one of Mark Wahlberg's quips and jokes throughout this. I think this movie actually might do really well this weekend coming out on Easter just due to that. I think there is going to be a certain conservative, older audience that is going to go in droves to see this film and support this film. And it has bankable stars like Mark Wahlberg. It has legendary actors like Mel Gibson in this film. And I think that might be enough to get it over the hump and be have a very successful Easter opening weekend. But yeah, so they're just buying into all these scenes, like laughing, cheering. There's a part where the choir comes in and they're clapping, and the audience is literally clapping, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, I'm thinking this film's pretty incompetent in its mission. When the film goes dark and the credits hit, the people are just standing. I'm hearing crying all over, and I'm just like, wow, this is such a disconnect, and it really shows that I don't know what the general audience wants. And specifically, films can be made for a certain audience and deliver with that audience, even if it's not made for the masses. I'm not going to say Father Stu is made for the masses, but I will say it's made for a specific audience, and that specific, again, conservative, older audience, I think, is going to really come out in droves for this movie. God, there's some scenes in this movie that I can't wait. I know on my channel, I already texted my co-host, Bran, I'm like, dude, we got to do a review of this movie, like break this stuff down, because there are some wild scenes in there. There's one scene in particular where something happens to Stu, and it's basically, let's just say this character goes flying off his bike. It literally looks like a stunt straight out of the film Hot Rod. Like, it literally looks like a dummy being thrown, and I burst out laughing, and it was the completely inappropriate time because no one else was laughing, and I think I got some scandalized looks. It was just so ridiculous looking in nature. There was just a lot of that where you'd see a scene, some of the prosthetic works in this film. Mark Wahlberg said, quote unquote, that he tried to gain some weight for this movie. It looks like he gained a little. He's definitely lying about the amount of prosthetics that were used. There was a heavy amount of prosthetics used on his face. That is not a natural weight gain, like, let's say, somebody that we saw, like a Christian Bale, gain that weight for American Hustle. This is not the case. This guy is really being heavily influenced by makeup to make a large chunk of this performance. and it shows and it looks a little fake. That's what the whole point of this movie, I think, is they're trying to do something, but it always kind of feels disingenuous. And that's how I would describe Father Stu. It's trying to say something in its own mind impactful and meaningful, but it just comes off a little disingenuous. I didn't hate this film. I think there are some good things to like. I think Mark Wahlberg's committing, and I think he gives a good performance that he's just not a strong enough actor to deliver a great performance. And I think this film, for how conventional it was, needed a great actor to do this. And I think it could have been something, again, maybe not necessarily a great movie, but it could have been a more look at what this actor does in this performance and kind of makes wonders of it. Think of like an Eyes of Tammy Faye last year, a movie that I did not particularly like, but Jessica Chastain is really good in that movie. That's what it felt like this film needed. It needed its Jessica Chastain. It needed its driving force. Maybe a Gary Oldman in Darkest Hours as Winston Churchill. It didn't have that. It had Mark Wahlberg kind of being Mark Wahlberg in the film and doing Mark Wahlberg things, and it doesn't fully connect that way. But he is committed to this role. This is a guy who helped produce this film. So he was clearly passionate about it, and he wanted to make something like this. And I commend him for that. It was a passion project for him, and it's cool when an actor gets to do that. I can't take that away from him. This is probably, to him, probably one of his most special roles and movies. It just didn't particularly work for me, and I found it really hokey. And I will be rewatching this film kind of in a joking manner. I think a lot of it's just so poorly mishandled, but so unintentionally comedically hysterical that it just kind of falls into the bad but funny category for me, where I will definitely be watching some of those scenes. That motorcycle stunt that I said is a laugh out loud, one of the funniest moments I've seen in 2022, as is a lot of the things and how they characterize Father Stu in this movie. There's just some ridiculous scenes, specifically because you're supposed to like the character of Father Stu, and he comes off so unlikable and just does stuff that is really creepy, and it's just like, I wish they maybe toned down on that, or just even thought about it for a little bit more and thought, is this really how we want to portray our protagonist? And I think it was trying to get, again, that old school Hollywood feel where it's just like, oh yeah, like, we're not going to worry about political correctness. Like, this is how men used to talk to women. There's a reason we changed that, and we want to be better. And this film embraces its conservative style abundantly, to put it gracefully, I'll say. But yeah, if this film is a film that you're interested in and you like the subject matter, you see the trailers, you're like, this is exactly the film that I want to see. The trailer delivers on that, and the film delivers on that promise. It is, believe what the trailer is. This is the type of movie you're getting. You're going to get a faith-based drama starring Mark Wahlberg and Mel Gibson. If you enjoy that, you're going to enjoy that. For me, it really did not work. Just for some of the commitment, for some of the performances, for Mel Gibson and specifically, and just for Mark Wahlberg, just kind of putting it all out there. I appreciate his just willingness to put himself out there and try something new and make something ambitious. I'm going to give it 1.5 out of 4 stars for that, but it's not a particularly good movie. And Father Stu just doesn't particularly ever come together in a meaningful or satisfying way. Let me know. Are you going to check out Father Stu this weekend? Let me know. And thank you as always for listening. My name is Ben here at the Beniverse. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.